Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Zeynep Gökçe. President Erdogan visited Italy this week with a clear agenda: strengthen defense and trade ties and reaffirm Turkey's growing role in European security. His trip comes as US President Donald Trump's upending of decades of US trade and security policies has shaken up the continent. Standing alongside Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Erdogan emphasized Turkey's and Italy's growing alignment on trade, defense, and the future of Europe's security architecture. The two sides agreed to raise bilateral trade to $40 billion a year. At the summit, Baykar, Turkey's top drone producer, signed a joint venture with Leonardo to develop advanced unmanned aerial systems. That follows an earlier deal last year when Baykar acquired Italy's Piaggio Aerospace. Erdogan's meeting comes as Europe rethinks its defense posture and as Trump's tariff war and embrace of Russia pushes European nations to strengthen ties with alternative partners. But how deep could ties between Ankara and Rome really go? For more on Turkiye-Italy ties, joining me from Rome is Valeria Gianotta. She's the Turkiye Observatory Scientific Director at the Center for International Political Studies. Also from Rome, Marco Carnelos, a former Italian ambassador, and from Istanbul, Zuhal Mert Uzuner, a professor at Marmara University and director of its Research Center for International Relations. Thank you all for joining me. Now, Valeria, tell us, what were some of the key highlights of this summit, and why was it so significant considering the current state of global affairs?
Well, there was much expectation about this summer, and the expectations were firmly confirmed. Many issues were on the table and many issues were discussed from a political, diplomatic, but also a bilateral point of view. Definitely there is an important complementarity on many dossiers, coming to the Black Sea War, coming to Middle East, and also the bilateral role that Turkey and Italy can play in the Mediterranean region, but also at a global level. One of the key points basically was the Turkish role, which was acknowledged by the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni as a mediator in the Ukraine and Russian war. Also, there is a joint commitment aiming at stabilizing Syria and calling for a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza, and also in guaranteeing the territorial integrity of Syria. At the bilateral level, the talks were based on the economical side, basically, on a bilateral trade exchange. Indeed, both leaders jointly signed a new declaration aiming at bringing the bilateral trade exchange to a new target of $40 billion, which is a remarkable target, also an ambitious one. Because if we consider the economic trend between Italy and Turkey, we can observe a constant increasing. For example, in 2019, the bilateral trade stood as $19 billion. In 2023, $26 billion. 2024, it went to $32 billion, going also beyond the joint target that was set during the last intergovernmental meeting in 2022 of $30 billion. Basically, many memorandum of understanding were signed related to different ministries and different topics, but there was much expectation and enthusiasm, I would say, on the memorandum of understanding that Leonardo, the Italian defense company, and Baykar signed in sealing the joint venture in terms of defense. Basically, it was remarked that Italy and Turkey can play a guaranteeing, a stabilizing role in the Mediterranean, because both countries share the same responsibility as historic presence and also the historic allies and friends in the region, but also the joint actions aiming at stabilize and intervene jointly in third markets and in other global regions, starting from Africa, where both Rome and Ankara have paid much attention, basically, to the human development of Africa, and also from a sustainable point of view. It has been also stated that Turkiye and Italy axis will play a crucial role, not just in the Mediterranean basin, where the action starts, but also they have the responsibility to connect the global south throughout the Mediterranean towards the Central Asian and Far East Asia. Therefore, what we saw in Rome, it was just the establishment of this new Turkey-Italy axis, aiming to further integrate their supply chain, aiming to reduce the risky factor in terms of global volatility, and also aiming at a rising of the main point of reference.
Yes, you gave us the whole picture in a nutshell. And President Erdogan and Prime Minister Meloni have met several times in the past years, especially since she took office in 2022. So, Marco, what explains this unusually close relationship between the two leaders?
Close relationship that used to be there even before. I remember the period when Prime Minister Berlusconi and Prime Minister Erdogan first and President Erdogan later have been very, very close. Originally, they created this intergovernmental format of meeting between the top leaders and a lot of ministers. What's there? Is there the fact that we are talking probably about two of the primary powers in the Mediterranean at the moment, two among the most important ones, especially, let's say, in the eastern part. And so they are two countries that have a lot of cooperation. They need to cooperate because they are, the situation requires a strict cooperation. If we go and see the trade routes, the energy routes, if we go and see the stabilization of the region, the cooperation on migration. It's not surprising for me that two big countries like Italy and Turkey are cooperating so much because their economies are in perfect synergy. Of course, we know that Turkey has an ambition to become one of the main supply route for energy towards Europe, and Italy, for this reason, can be a very, very most welcome recipient for that. So, in a way, the cooperation is written in their history. They are also two big cultural powers, both of them. We have to remember, in this case, we are in front of two cultural superpowers. Italy for the history, but also Turkey as the country who inherited the Islamic tradition of the Ottoman Empire. So even from the cultural point of view, there's a lot they can do. They're already doing a lot, that they could do more. And especially considering the volatility of the international situation, considering how much reinforced understanding is needed at this stage. If we go and see the region around Turkey, it's not a safe or stable region at the moment. We have problems in Syria, we have problems in Lebanon, Iraq is not stabilized, there's still problems with Iran, there's the migrants that are trying to escape certain very conflictual situation.
Yes,
so in a way,
Marco, you're mentioning the migrants at this point. We will continue, but at this point, I want to come to my next question because this has been at the top of the agenda for both leaders in the past years. And Zuhal, after Turkey and Italy's cooperation on the issue, what has been the results? Did they get the results that they were hoping for?
For the next years, actually, there is a very big potential for more cooperation between Italy and Turkey. There are many reasons for that. As the previous guest speakers explained very well and in detail, we can say that there is a kind of agreement between two regional actors in the Mediterranean. First of all, both of them want a kind of inclusive mechanism, multilateral mechanism and cooperation mechanisms for the resolution of the problems in the region. This is a very important and principal, let's say, the reason for the further cooperations. And also another issue is considering this wider, let's say, the geographical considerations of these two countries. What I mean by saying that for not only for the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, limited with what we see on the map around, let's say, the coastal countries around the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. But this consideration covers a little bit wider regional understanding, including Black Sea. So that is another very critical point, that two different actors, two countries have agreed on this, let's say, this process of, let's say, the dialogue.
Yeah, what about the migration issue? Like, because they have cooperated on this issue. Where is it at the moment, Suhail?
First of all, we need to refer that migration issue became the very problematic issue for Italy when we look at its history, because of the south-north flow of migrants was very dominant in our agenda of international relations. Later it has expanded, as we know, but both countries have another very important common point about this issue. Why? Because both of them agree that the resolution of the let's say, the source causes of this migration shall be solved. From that perspective, stability and let's say the supporting the countries in trouble, especially because of civil strife. So we can see there are also some kind of let's say the common point in their perspective towards the region.
Yes, going back to the summit at this point, and Valeria had mentioned the $40 billion trade target the two leaders set. Valeria, how central is economic cooperation to strengthening ties, and in which sectors do you see Turkey expanding its exports to Italy?
Well, the economic issue is the engine, basically, is the backbone of the bilateral relations between Italy and Turkey. Indeed, it's not a coincidence that there was a very big and important delegation of businessmen accompanying President Erdogan to Italy. And also there was an important presence of the Italian businessmen in the Business Economic Forum. There were the focus were on many sectors, such as circular economy, sustainable energy, infrastructure, manufacture, innovation, and digitalization. What we are witnessing is a growing presence of Turkish companies investing in Italy in several sectors, and which also reflect the backbone of the Turkish export towards Italy. I'm referring to all manufacturing sector, machinery, automotive, also textile, fruit and vegetable, as well as some metals such as iron and steels. But nowadays, a growing attention is towards some other niche sectors such as pharmaceutical, as well as innovation and technologies, as also the memorandum of understanding on in different fields have been proving. I refer not just to Baykar and Leonardo, but also some memorandum of understanding have been signed by the Italian Ministry of Made in Italy and the Turkish Ministry of Innovation and Technology, where they declare the joint commitment in terms of aerospace, and also in the both national aerospace agency have signed important memorandum of understanding in terms of research and development. So I think there are many fields showing the perfect complementarity of the Italian and Turkish business sectors, also in terms of joint action in different fields.
And they've also mentioned deepening cooperation in other parts of the world, particularly Africa. Marco, in which sectors or regions do you see them cooperating in other parts of the world?
Well, first of all, they should cooperate more, in my view, to stabilize Libya, a country where both attach a great importance, but they should go beyond Libya. The two countries, they can have important synergy in their economies to provide better infrastructures in Africa, renewable energy, and also to improve the agri-tech sector, because Africa in this moment needs infrastructure, needs renewable energy, and needs, of course, a better agriculture expertise in order to feed its own population. So, for example, these are three sectors where the two countries could do something important together. Of course, in the moment they are able to do these important things together, they could become a joint factor of stabilization in certain areas of Africa, where their, let's say, moral suasion, their technological power, let's say their financial power to a certain extent, could be helpful for certain region of Africa to settle down certain tense situation. They could become a factor of stability in many areas, because we know from experience that the northern shore of the Mediterranean is usually affected by certain kind of crisis in Africa. And so this is, let's say, is a preemptive policies in order to stabilize a continent that is the continent of the futures, according to all the experts. And being the continent of the future is going to reverberate what it does immediately on two countries that are in the Mediterranean, and one is Italy and the other is Turkey. Not just to left behind the others, but we are talking about Turkey-Italy cooperation here.
At this point, I want to talk about the defense deals, which were probably the biggest highlight of this summit between Italian defense firm Leonardo and Turkish drone maker Baykar. Zuhal, what would each side bring to the table in this partnership?
It is clear that Turkish expertise, development in defense technology is very obvious. And when we look at the proportional rise of Turkish industry for especially unmanned, let's say, devices, not only air and also in the sea and other fields, it is clear that there's a rising capability in the hands of Turkish engineering, and especially Baykar, because Baykar has the highest proportional role in this defense industry. Let's say the selling to the third countries. But on the other side, we have some other, let's say, the inputs coming from the Italian, let's say, the sector, because they have a very high level of, let's say, the expertise. When we look at these Italian companies bought by Baykar, it is clear that it has also its own a century-old reputation, and they had also several capacities, especially for civil aviation and rather and other technologies. So the cooperation about this technological matters are really, let's say, the beneficial for both sides. And from another aspect, for the European development of the European defense industry is at the, let's say, the table. And for that purpose, the input coming from Turkey, especially for these unmanned, let's say, the vehicles, especially like the TB2, so that can bring an extra the input to this new efforts for developing European capacity. And there are so many numbers discussed in the TVs and other resources, and it can be up to 100 million euros. So this is billion euros. So that can create a huge potential, not only for Turkey and Italy. We can see also a very important potential input for European security. From that perspective, that cooperation is really a region-wide promising project.
Right. And back in December, Baykar also acquired Italian aviation firm Piaggio Aerospace. Valeria, is it fair to say Turkey is positioning itself as a major player in Europe's defense market?
Well, it's fair. It's fair to state that Turkey is expanding its sphere of influence in terms of defense towards the European market. For the first time, thanks to Baykar acquisition of Piaggio Aerospace, and then to the most recent joint venture between Leonardo and Baykar, the Turkish production will be located within the European territory, namely in Italy. And this is intended to be a strategic move in terms of penetrating further the European market. Indeed, the joint venture between Leonardo and Baykar is intended to take a slice of European market worth of $10 million in the medium period. Definitely, this requires as well an adjustment in terms of regulation, because as we know, the European regulation in terms of defense is quite rigid. But both Italy and Turkey are working on that. What we see that basically Leonardo will integrate the Baykar system within its production in terms of innovation and technology. And Baykar will benefit from a long-standing tradition given to Leonardo and also Aerospace, Piaggio Aerospace expertise in the field. So it's a win-win situation that we can also consider in terms of constructing a future defense system for Europe as such. Overall, it comes in a very timely period when there is a debate going on the issue of rearming Europe. But it has also a significant element, according to my point of view, which highlighting the necessity of Italy and Turkey to have a sort of strategic autonomy from the traditional defense supplier partner.
So speaking of defense, Marco Meloni says Italy is on track to meet NATO's defense spending target this year. And since the US is pulling away from Europe, could we see Turkey playing a bigger role in European security? And what would that look like?
Well, first of all, we have to say that Turkey is already playing a big role in European security, because the so-called southern flank of NATO is primarily overseen by Turkey, and this is the most important military power in Europe, within NATO, together with Germany, France, Italy, and UK. So it's already a quite important role. Of course, this role will necessarily be improved and will be enlarged if the United States, as it seems to be the case, will reduce their commitments in Europe. I'm still a little bit doubtful if this will take place, because I tend to make a big difference between what President Trump says and what President Trump usually implements after what he said. And my modest experience is there are significant discrepancies between these two aspects. But in case the United States will reduce their commitment in Europe, and we have no idea if it will be on land, on air, on sea, on all the three. Definitely, Turkey will be called to a more important role, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Balkans, possibly, to look after what in the past was the most fragile flank of NATO. Now we see that the Central Front, due to Ukraine, has become, and another one in the Baltic, has become they become the more important ones at the moment. But we should not underestimate what is coming from the southeastern part of the Mediterranean, because the situation is not stable yet.
Yes, at this point, we're running out of time. I have one last question for Zuhal. So Meloni is one of the rare EU leaders that has a close relationship with US President Trump. So Zuhal, do you think she could play a mediating role in this transatlantic tariff dispute?
I think there's a high level of credibility. It is obvious from the last visit of Meloni to Washington. And also we can see that the approaches of two leaders to much more working on transactional, let's say the resolution of the problems may help for for overcoming several difficulties or disagreements between Europeans and United States. Yes, she can play a very critical role, but it is also related with the changing priorities of the time, as the dear ambassador expressed very correctly. And I agree with him about this changing discourse coming from Washington leadership. Trump started to change the discourse about the Russian-Ukraine war. So the situation may change very dramatically, but what I see, this maybe not so positive considered by many scholars or let's say the discussants but transactional approaches may help to overcome sometimes, for the short term, some important problems. From that perspective, I think yes, the answer to your question.
All right, unfortunately, that's all the time we had. Thank you all for joining me on Straight Talk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Zeynep Gökçe. If you've got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.